Well, good evening. How's everybody tonight? Good. I am so glad that you're here, and aren't we glad that we are forgiven? That in the midst of saying yes to Jesus and when we give our lives to Christ, one of the greatest gifts we get back is forgiveness. And forgiveness from all our past sins, forgiveness from those things that we struggle with now, and forgiveness of those that are even ahead of us. And so God's grace is truly amazing, and we get to live in that grace. And so if you have never said yes to Jesus, you're missing out on some amazing grace. And so I would just encourage you to think through that, and maybe tonight would be the night that you would say yes to Jesus. So we're going to pray. Can we do that? So if you would just bow your heads with me and let's just pray. Father God, we just come to you tonight, and Lord, we do just say thank you for being a God of grace. Father, for being a God that looks beyond our imperfection, looks beyond our mess-ups, looks beyond our junk, and sees what you created us to be. And Father, you offer your forgiveness. Lord, your word says that if we confess that you are willing and always able to forgive. So Lord, we come to you with thankful hearts, with hearts filled with gratitude for your love for your creation. Father, Lord, your word also says that we were created in your image. And Father, that we ought to live our lives in a way that imitates you. And the best way we can do that is that we can imitate Jesus. And Lord, we can look to your word, and we can discover how Jesus lived his life, and then we should strive to live that way. And Lord, that means that we sit at the table with sinners. That means that we help those that are hungry. Lord, it means that we give water to those that are thirsty. Father, it means that we stand for justice. Lord, it means that we welcome all kinds of people. Lord, help us to imitate your Son in our everyday lives. Father, not just here on Wednesday night or whenever we go to church on a regular basis, but Father, may we imitate your life in every moment of every day. Father, help us to be mindful of how we are to live our lives. And Lord, I think if we can just remember that you've called us to love you and to love people, that we can make an impact and a difference in the world. But Lord, it means putting you at the center. So Lord, I pray tonight that as we continue our conversation about almost and what that looks like in our world today, that Lord, that you would remove the scales from our eyes tonight. Father, that you would unplug our ears. And Lord, you would soften our hearts so that we can see and hear and know exactly what it is that you have for us tonight as we talk about dangerous desires, as we talk about sexual temptation that's all around us. And Lord, that we would leave here better equipped to live the good life, to live your life. In your name we pray. Amen. Well, I have a couple things that I need to ask of you before we jump into our conversation tonight. And the first thing is that many of you know Miss Pat. She's usually sitting right over here. And she is in the hospital tonight. And so if you could just be keeping Miss Pat in your prayers, that would be awesome. And then I'm going to ask a selfish prayer. I'm getting ready to leave on Sunday for South Africa for 10 days. And so I'm asking that you would just pray for safety for me. And as Josh said in our gathering earlier, sanity for my wife. And as she holds down the fort, and for me as I travel a long way away. And so I would appreciate that. And so I will miss you for the next 2 weeks, but look forward to being back with you as we jump into the next series. And we'll be talking about prayer when I come back, and that's going to be awesome. And so I'm really excited about that series, and I'm excited about us just kind of focusing in on having conversation with God, what that looks like. And how we can have better conversations with God, maybe. So you'll want to be a part of that in 2 weeks. We kick it off, and it's going to be really good. That thing called prayer is going to be awesome. But right now we're going to not finish up. We got one more week in our series called Almost, and we are in week 5, and we've been building off of this quote up here from Charles Spurgeon, and the quote is a pretty infamous quote. And can we show that one there? I don't know, Jay, is that you? Okay. Somebody, maybe? feel all alone. Here we go. So Charles Spurgeon, he made this quote, and it said, "Discernment is not knowing the difference between right and wrong. It's knowing the difference between right and almost right." And I love that quote, and it was a quote that a few people get together once a month, and we call it the round table, and it's like the creative brainstorming machine that helps us kind of kick out some ideas for the table. And so if you'd like to be on the round table, if you got ideas, we'd love to have you. We meet once a month. But one of the folks in there, Corey, brought this quote to us. It was from a Bible study that she's doing, and she's like, "Man, I'd really love to unpack this quote." And I'm like, "Man, we could do that." And because I just think that's an amazing quote by Charles Spurgeon to remind us that really the thing that we wrestle with in our world is not the difference between right and wrong, but the difference between right and almost right. And like I said, we live in this culture that often chooses to do almost right, the almost right thing, rather than the right thing. And in our house, we have this saying that goes around that says, "Do the right thing." And we say it often. We say it to our kids. We say it to each other. Me and Jen say it to each other. She probably says it more to me than I to her. But hey, Rick, do the right thing. And so we want to live out this thing. But our culture is always choosing to do the almost right thing, and rather than the right thing. And I think one of the most obvious areas of this is sexual temptation. And I grew up in church, and I can tell you that the topic of sexual temptation was rarely, if ever, talked about in the churches that I grew up in. Like, if anybody was going to talk about that kind of subject, it was either really vague or really awkward. Like, the conversation was like so awkward that you wanted to crawl under the pew, or you wanted to just leave. But tonight, I just want you to know that we're gonna deal with it directly, and we're gonna deal with it honestly. And I hope that it won't be an awkward conversation, and it truly won't be a vague conversation. And as the church, though, I think that we need to be honest about this topic because it's in our face all the time, and many of us are struggling, and many of the people that are near and dear to us are struggling with the sexual temptations that are surrounding us. You see, here's what I'm learning, is I'm learning that the evil one wants us to believe that sexual temptation is like a dirty little secret that we can't talk about, so that we will live in isolation, so that we'll live in fear and shame and ongoing guilt. And that's what a lot of us do, especially us guys. Like, we don't want to admit if we ever had like this temptation living in our lives, because we don't want to deal with the shame, we don't want to deal with the guilt. So we live in isolation, and we also live in fear because we can't tell anyone else. What would someone else think about us if we actually told someone that this was something that we struggled with? But tonight, we are dragging this out into the light like we should do with so many things that we don't do. We're going to drag it out into the light so that we can be free, so that we can live pure and pleasing lives to God and proactively deal with temptation. And yes, as we sang, and even receive God's healing and forgiveness. And I want you to hear this tonight, that from me, from this stage, from this person, there is absolutely no judgment going on here. Like, we all got junk in our lives, and that's not my job description, and I'm glad it's not my job description. I'm not here to place judgment on anybody. God's got that. That's not me. That's him. I gladly give him that responsibility. And so I just want you to know that there's no judgment coming from here. My whole purpose for tonight is that if this is something that you are struggling with, that maybe tonight you would leave with the very minimum, with hope that there is healing and there is forgiveness available to you. And if you would leave at the maximum, that you would leave here feeling healed and feeling forgiven. And so let me briefly describe the problem. So temptation is everywhere, right? Sexual temptation is everywhere. We've got like adult videos, escort services, magazines, sex clubs, phone sex, pornography on social media, and the list goes on and on and on. Like, I could list a ton of things about this temptation in our lives. And what every one of these things has in common is that billions and billions of dollars are spent on each and every one of these items. Here's the deal. Globally, like, this isn't me just making it up, this is reality, that globally, that pornography is a $97 billion industry. Now, look at that. That's like, if I put zeros up there, that would be a ton of zeros. Like, people are spending their money, millions of people are spending their money and involved in sexual temptation in the world that we live in. Now, you don't have to go far from Brandon to experience this. Like, I don't know if you've ever driven east or west on Highway 60 lately, but you drive a little, you know that section on Highway 60 that I'm talking about between here and IKEA? Like, I like to go to IKEA, but I know I gotta drive through that section of town, and I know I gotta, like, keep front, keep your eyes looking ahead, don't let the kids look around, and you just drive, you drive through that section because it's all over the place in that section of town. Or, if I'm going, like, north on 75, it's like, it's hard not to think about sex when you're driving north on 75 because I'm reminded every so often or every few exits about this strip club that's just so many miles down the road. And it like, it's like billboard after billboard after billboard. And I keep waiting for Jackson to go, hey, what is that? Because I know that it's going to come. There's a day coming when he's going to ask, what is that? And so, it's hard to stay focused when you're driving down or up 75. And not to mention all the ads that appear on social media and television. I don't know if you know this or not, but let me just lay it really low for you. Let me just throw it out there, and let's just get to the nitty-gritty here. Did you know that 93% of boys and 63% of girls are exposed to internet porn before they turn 18? I want you to think about that for a minute. I thought about that when I was writing this. I was like, holy cow. 93% of boys and 63% of girls. I mean, I can remember when I was growing up as a little guy that, Grandpa had some magazines, but there wasn't any chance in the world that I was going to find them. But nowadays, it's such an easy thing for us to get our hands on. I mean, think about commercials on TV today. Even regular television has sex in almost every program that you watch. And then you think about the commercials. How many of you seen Hardee's or Carl Jr. commercials? Like, have you seen those commercials? I'm like, who would have ever thought they're selling hamburgers after you watch that? I'm like, I would have never thought that. I mean, when I first saw it, I'm like, what are they selling? And then it comes up with hamburgers, and I'm like, no way. And so we see it everywhere. We're exposed, and we're tempted on every side. So how can we stay pure in a sex-saturated society and honor God? Well, first, we need to know some things. And the first thing I think we need to know is this. We need to know what God has to say about it. And the good news is this, is that God does not shy away from sex. In fact, He deals with it honestly and directly. He does that because He knows that if we don't handle our sexual desires correctly, it can devastate our marriages, our children, and even threaten our career. Now, as I was doing some homework, I realized or found out another study showed that 63% of men and 36% of women view porn at work. So when I say that it can affect your career, it can affect your career. And so it affects all of us. And just in case you thought this was just a message for men, hold on, I got more stats here. 1 out of 3 visits to a porn site is made by a woman. And 1 out of 3 women admit to viewing porn. So this is not just a message for us guys in here. This thing is affecting all of us, either personally or someone we love. And sexual temptation is a real problem, and many people are giving in to thinking that it's okay or almost right, and we all know that almost right is always wrong. You see, here's what's happening in our culture today. Pornography is a $97 billion industry because people think, well, no one's getting hurt. I'm just watching it on a screen, and no one else is around, so no one else is getting hurt. But it is destroying marriages. It is destroying relationships. Because 93% of the boys and 63% of the girls have seen it before they turn 18. So it's affecting all of us. And we need to know what God's Word has to say about it. And so let me share with you tonight 4 things about this. The first thing I want you to know about it tonight is this, that God gave desire to everybody. That every single one of us in here has desire. Why? Because God created sex. And it was His idea. And the Bible says that when God made man, He discovered that Adam was utterly lonely. So God made a companion for him. He made woman, and she was different physically than Adam was. And Adam saw her naked, and he said, I'm digging this, God, and I'm seeing, and what I'm seeing here is good. And God said it was good. And then God looked at them, and he blessed them. And in Genesis 1:28, he said, hey, Adam and Eve, I want you to be fruitful and multiply. And the cool thing is that they saw each other naked, and they had no shame. And so you see, God created this desire and this attraction for the opposite sex, but when we use it outside of the boundaries of marriage, we often get into trouble. I'm going to pick on you for a minute, students. I'm not going to look at you because I know you'll get embarrassed, but here's the reality that God created. I'm going to look at you. God created boundaries for sexual temptation, and he said, hey, sex is good as long as it's done in marriage. And he did it for a reason. And so we have to remember that outside the boundaries of marriage, we often get ourselves into trouble. And that's what lust is. Lust is our God-given desire gone haywire. I mean, that's really what it is. Lust is just our God-given desire. God created desire within us. And when that desire goes haywire, it turns into lust. And it's like this. Let me just put it to you really plain and simple. I have a desire to drink water. God made me this way. I need to hydrate my body, right? It keeps me going. But there are some boundaries there. Like, I try to avoid drinking water out of a toilet. I just do. I don't care if you clean your toilet with bleach every single day. I'm not going to drink it. And I don't care if you put ice in it to make it cold. I'm not going to drink it. And I don't care if you give me a really cool cup to draw the water out of. I'm still not going to drink toilet water. I also try to avoid drinking water out of potholes. I'm not into muddy, oily, gas-tainted water. Sure, if I drink water out of the toilet or the pothole, it may temporarily quench my thirst, but you know and I know that toilet water and pothole water are no good for my body. And I'll stick, no pun intended, I'll stick to drinking filtered water because it's pure and it's good for me. And you see, God's plan for purity is for us to have one man and one woman together in marriage in a sexual relationship. That's God's perfect boundary. Everything else is toilet water. Does that help you out right there? Everything else outside of marriage is toilet water and pothole water, okay? Maybe that'll help you. I don't know. And so God gave us all the desire, but we've got to keep it in check. We've got to keep this desire. I mean, if God gave it to us, he wanted us to have it, but we got to keep it in check. Second thing I want you to know tonight is this, that lust can attack anybody. Everybody say anybody. Lust can attack anybody. Every single one of us in this room are prime targets. You see, Satan wants to drive a wedge between you and God, and lust is one of his major tools. Like lies, number one, lust is like probably number two. Maybe we need to come up with a sermon, the 4 L's. I don't know what the other two would be, but it's a major tool that he uses, lust. And if it weren't true, porn wouldn't be making $97 billion a year. I mean, come on. That's what Satan loves to use, is lust. Now remember David, the giant killer? You know, he was a poet. He was a king. He was also called the man after God's own heart. And he wasn't looking for sex, but he sees a beautiful naked woman taking a bath one day. And 2 Samuel 11:2 says, David got out of his bed and was walking on the roof of the palace, and as he looked over the city, he noticed a woman of unusual beauty taking a bath. And you know what? From that moment on, David falls really fast and he hits hard. Listen, we are all vulnerable. Every single one of us is just as vulnerable as King David was. Nobody is invincible. No one is too spiritual. You see, David sees this amazing woman and he is immediately attracted to her. And that's the God-giving desire. And at that moment, there's no problem. He's attracted. But instead of turning away, which is what he should have done, he doesn't. He keeps staring. His mind begins to wander and think about what's next. Then he has her come to his palace, And then he has sex with Bathsheba, and it all goes haywire after that. Because lust is desire gone haywire. It started with the eyes, and then it filtered into his mind, and then he acted on it. And just like David, the man after God's own heart, just like he wasn't immune to sexual temptation, neither are we. Like, you can pick the holiest of man. We can say Billy Graham. And Billy Graham would come in this room and he would confess to you that not even him, he is not even immune to sexual temptation. That he experiences it too, and he's like a spiritual giant. The moment you think that you are immune to it, the moment that you say, oh, that'll never happen to me, is the moment that you make yourself an easy target for lust. So lust can happen to anybody. Third thing is this. I want to challenge you tonight to be accountable to somebody. Be accountable to somebody. You see, lust gets out of control really fast, and we tend to keep it a secret. But that's not what we should be doing. We need to get it out in the open, and we need to shed light on it. Otherwise, we will never have victory over lust. We got to tell someone. If you're sitting in here and you know that you're experiencing this, and you're in the middle of it, you've got to get it out into the open. You've got to drag it out into the light. As a church, as church people, as people that go to church, as people who say they are Christians, we've got to stop pretending that we are perfect, because we know that we're not. We just got to stop pretending. We say around here all the time, this is the perfect place for imperfect people. Leadership recognizes that they're imperfect, and you should recognize that you're imperfect too. And we are all messed up, and as Christians, we're going to blow it. And you might be thinking you're the only one in here dealing with sexual temptation. Well, let me just tell you right now, I absolutely 100% guarantee you are not the only person in here dealing with sexual temptation. You're not the only one struggling. And that's why we need to get it out in the open and get real with someone. Now, what I'm not telling you to do is go home and get on Facebook and say, hey, I am dealing with this sexual temptation, and let everyone know. Y'all can be my accountability partners, all 300 of my friends. No, that's not what I'm saying, okay? So track with me here. What I'm saying is that you need to let someone you trust help you and pray for you. We need accountability in our lives. We need men and women in our lives that we can go to, that we can trust, that we can know that they're going to pray for me and they're not going to hold judgment on me, and you can pray for them and you're not going to hold judgment on them. Ecclesiastes 4:2 reminds us, it says, a person standing alone can be attacked and defeated, but two can stand back to back and conquer. Three are even better, for a triple braided cord is not easily broken. Amazing passage. Real simple. It reminds us that, hey, on our own, we're probably going to fall flat on our face. But when we got two people standing back to back and watching all sides, we can conquer some things. And then it goes one step further and says, hey, if it's three people, it's even better, because a triple braided cord is really hard to be broken. And so the best defense against sexual temptation is you, a trustworthy friend, and God. And when you have those three with you, you've got accountability. And you need accountability because lust is stalking many of us. And then the fourth and final thing I want you to know tonight is this, that you got to know your body. You've got to know your own body. Know your trigger points. Know those places and people and feelings that turn you sideways. Let me get super practical with you for a minute, and let's look at, real quick, just 4 areas of this. The first thing is you got to know the places you go. All right, you've got to know and be aware of the places you go. Hooters may get you sideways. So even if they do serve good chicken wings, which I don't think they do, but if they do, don't go there. If you get you sideways, don't go to Hooters. Avoid places that can trigger lust. Avoid, if there's a convenience store that you go get gas, but they've got some videos on the wall, and you look at those videos every time you go in there to pay, don't go to that convenience store. Stay away from those bars or those, if you're a traveler, if you travel for work and you're going to hotels and you go to a specific chain and you know that that specific chain always has adult movies playing, avoid that hotel. Go to another one. Or when you get to the front desk, say, hey, can you turn off my TV or something? And avoid restaurants and other places that you know will get you sideways. So you got to know what your trigger is and avoid the places you go. Also, the people that you're attracted to. Avoid spending time with that magnetic coworker that you just seem to be like magnetized towards. Don't talk to that beautiful girl at the gym that gets you sideways, or that beautiful guy at the gym that gets you sideways. Don't find yourself alone with someone that you emotionally connect with. Don't put yourself in a position where you could fall. You know, that was David's problem. He was where he wasn't supposed to be. He stayed home. He should have been out there at the front lines with the rest of his men. But he stayed home and he was lounging around. I'm going to be king for the day. I'm just going to do nothing. And walks out on that terrace, and that's where he sees Bathsheba, and that's where things get sideways. So know the places that you go, the people that you're attracted to, and this one, what you think about. Just like those pop-up screens when you're on the internet, like they don't happen as much anymore, but you know those pesky pop-ups that would come up, and you know your mind's kind of like that. You'll be sitting there thinking about nothing at all. Maybe you're thinking about the birds or whatever, and then all of a sudden these lustful thoughts pop up in your mind. You got to hit the delete button. Like you can't linger on those thoughts. That was David's problem too, man. He sat on that rooftop and he began to linger on those thoughts because he didn't turn his eyes away, which was rule number 1, and he should have done that. And because he didn't do that, his thoughts began to linger and began to play that scenario out until it became reality. And so you got to hit the delete button. Like when those thoughts pop in your brain, you got to shut them down. You got to shut them down. If that means that you got to like find a passage in the Bible that every time that you get a thought like that, you just repeat that passage, that'll shut it down. Think about toilet water. I mean, when those lustful thoughts come, just think about toilet water and that'll shut you down right there. And so think about those things. And then last is this. You got to be aware of what you expose yourself to. And I think this is the biggest deal for us. That you got to watch out for stuff on the internet, on your phones, on social media, and so on. And we have so much access right at our fingertips. Like I could pull out my phone and I could type in one word and Google. And I could like misspell one word by one letter. And it would take me to a place that I never wanted to go. And so you got to be aware of what you're exposing yourself to. Put filters in place for you and for your kids. On my laptop, there's a thing called XXX Church. And one of my friends has my email. And so if ever my computer goes to an inappropriate site, he automatically gets an email that says, hey, Rick's going to an inappropriate site. And I guarantee you, if I sat back there and did it, I would get a phone call and T-minus like 10 minutes if he's home. And he would say, what are you doing? So we got to put filters on our stuff, but we got to put filters on our children's stuff as well. Like, don't bury your head in the sand and say, oh, my kids will never do that. You're right, they probably never would, but they probably hit Google and misspelled one word, and then it opened up one thing that opened up another thing, which opened up another thing, and before you know it, they're all into it. So we got to put filters on our stuff. Set boundaries on the movies you watch. If there's movies out there that get you going sideways, don't go see them. I mean, let's just be big people and put on our big boy and big girl britches and go out there and live the big girl and boy life. And let's make sure that we're being cautious of the things that we're allowing into our mind. So here's the mission when it comes to purity. Use your bodies as a holy sacrifice to God. And your body and your mind as an offering are an offering to the most holy God. That's why Romans chapter 12, verse 1, Paul says this. He says, and so, dear brothers and sisters, notice how he doesn't just talk to the men here. Oh, dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you to give your bodies to God because of all that He has done for you. Let them, your bodies, be a living and holy sacrifice, the kind that He, being God, will find acceptable. This is truly the way to worship Him. Let God transform you into a new person by changing the way you think. Paul knew right off the bat, as he gave his life to Christ, I imagine that he probably faced some temptations in his life. And he knew right away, he's like, man, we've got to keep this in check. Like, we've got to keep our bodies in check, and the best way that you can keep your bodies in check is that you let them be a living and holy sacrifice for the living God. That you say, God, I'm going to sacrifice my desires, my temptations, my wants, and I'm going to give them to you. I'm going to sacrifice them to you because you know what's better for me better than I do. And so I want you to know tonight that whatever stage of lust you are in, however deep you might be into sexual temptation, hear me when I say this, there is hope. There is always a way out, even if you feel stuck. There's a way out. You see, God is bigger than the porn industry. God has more resources available to him than the porn industry does. And that's why we've got to bring our junk to God, and you and I have got to ask for forgiveness. But hear me when I say this. It's not enough for us just to say, God, I messed up, please forgive me. He will forgive you, but you got to find someone here on earth, a human being that will help you walk through that temptation. You need accountability in your life. No matter if you're a teenager or if you're 70 years old. And if you're 70 years old and you're like, I don't know having those desires. I've told you the story of my friend Brian that was 76 and had dealt with pornography for 25 years. And at 76 years of age, he heard a similar message, and he said, I've got to get rid of this in my life. And he took it seriously, and he got a counselor, and he got accountability, and he nipped it, as he said. He nipped it in the bud. He got rid of it. He eradicated it. But he couldn't do it without one God and without two accountability in his life. And so don't think that you're too old to fall into the temptation, because you're not. And don't think that you're too young, because I've already shown you that you're not, to fall into this temptation. So let's be smart. Let's live our lives, give our bodies to Christ as a living sacrifice. And let's say, God, I have the urge, I have the desire, I have the want in my life, but you know what's best for me better than I do, and your word says that I need to avoid sexual immorality, of which pornography, sex outside of marriage, is sexual immorality. Okay? So don't do almost right. Let's do always right when it comes to sexual temptation. Would you pray? Father God, we just thank you for just the opportunity to talk about a subject that maybe is awkward or uncomfortable for many of us. Father, because it's something that we don't often talk about. We hide it into the dark corners of our lives. And Lord, I pray that tonight that you would help us to drag that stuff into your light. And Father, that as we do that, that you would eradicate those temptations in our lives, Lord, so that we can live our lives pure and purely for you. And so, Lord, I pray that if there's someone in here tonight, Lord, that is really struggling with sexual temptation, that maybe tonight would be the night that they get some help. That tonight might be the night that they would find someone that's wiser than them, that can help them, that they can trust, to help them to deal with that sexual temptation in them. Father, help us not to fall into temptation, too, of thinking it's just a male thing. It's not. It's a male and female thing. Lord, help us not to be ignorant of the fact that so many of us struggle with this. And Lord, we want to be always right. Lord, we don't want to be almost right. And so, Lord, may we find our courage from you to tackle this issue if it's in our lives. We love you, and it's in your name we pray. Amen.